All right, welcome everyone to this Force Friday. Hope everyone's doing well. Just double checking here. We had to build up a new meeting, make sure everything's functioning. Yeah, it looks good. All right, we're a little early. I just wanted to make sure technically everything was running okay. It seems like we're all good. Yes, Redacted asked, why am I so angry? Did someone take my gummy bears? I like gummy bears, that's true. But as I wrote here, I think I would put M&Ms over that. On a small side note, I happened to, when I was in Germany, I visited the town where gummy bears are made. I think it was Bonn, B-O-N-N, and they actually have Haribo, is the name of the company that is most known for making gummy bears. They're located in Bonn, and they have a shop. That's what I'm trying to get at here. They actually had a gummy bear shop, and they had that gummy bear icon of that bear in the window, like a sculpture of it. Somewhere I have a picture of it, so maybe at some point I'll try to bring it in. So today we're going to talk about extreme perspective, right? The irony here is that it really adds a lot of great drama to drawing, to figure drawing, or anything for that matter, right? Because we're developing deep space, and yet it's super challenging to navigate, right, to do. And to double the irony, once you do know how to draw really well, like, man, you just want to draw in that space. It's just so much fun to work with depth and the extremities or extremeness of perspective, right? Because it just makes the artwork that much cooler. And it's more challenging. And then, the better you learn how to draw, the more you want that challenge. So our goal today, Swanli, Mrityunjay, and I are going to teach you some tricks that we use on how to manage your way through that space, and make sure that we're still working with force, right? Like, how does that all come together? So with that being said, let's say hello to our other force instructors. How you doing, Swanli?
Good. Ready to stack some objects and people. Great depth.
Yeah, it's like I am here. Little me and big me. Right now I'm in my own hand right there. Like, oh, this way. How you doing, Mrityunjay?
Doing good. Ready to stretch some people in space.
So as always, feel free to ask us any questions, when you're in the chat there, and we'll do our best to answer them. Before we get rolling here, as a reminder, please subscribe if you like what we're teaching you here, and hit that notification button to be notified, right, as to when new videos are coming up, instead of having to concern yourself with trying to remember, right? So let's get to it today. Mrityunjay is going to start us off, and then it will be me. And then Swanli is going to close up the session. Let me get these guys co-host ability. And there we go. All right. So whenever you're ready, Mrityunjay.
All right. Let's take over. All right. Copying and decided. Okay, there we go. All right, you can see this.
Yep.
All right, guys. So how to draw figures in perspective, right? So today we're not just talking about perspective, but in extreme perspective. Okay, so extreme perspective is looking at the figures from the really top down shot, or like from the bottom shot. Okay, and the first words might come up like stacking, and just like Sunny also said, in the beginning, stacking, right? Stacking is what we need, but the first thing that we need is what's in the title as well, is perspective, right? We'll talk about perspective a little bit. We'll go through the stacking, like how those boxes, we are obviously dealing with boxes and stuff, like 3D forms, okay? Basically the primitives in space, okay? And how we're going to stack them on top of each other to create this illusion of perspective. And then we're going to go through how to kick in force, how to kick in force and then make it like dynamic, okay? Because we just want to, we don't want to make them feel like they are mannequins, like wooden mannequins, okay? So we also want like the liveliness and the energy, Okay, so those are the 3 steps, you know, that I'm going to cover like roughly, and then certainly Mike will go in details and say, okay, this is how it works. Okay, more details about it. All right, so perspective. We'll talk about perspective a little bit. Let's get the cover up, right? We'll talk about perspective a little bit. So yeah, the main perspective that we're dealing with is the 3-point perspective. Okay. We usually teach like the fake, we usually say how to avoid the fake 1-point perspective, you know, and then go through the 2-point perspective and 3-point perspective as well. So here's a little rundown. So this is this one, right? This is single like 1-point perspective. This is how we go, right? This one, right? A very big mistake though, by the way. You don't wanna make a box like this. Is a fake box or fake perspective is what you can say. Because this front face, you know, it's actually not turning, right? You cannot like have the same front square and then just like you know, show the size basically. Okay. You just basically want to like turn that in. So if you're not like learning this, basically, you know, this is a very simple thing, but if you don't learn this, you cannot deal with the 3-point and these extreme perspectives. Okay. So learning the fake box first, I mean, start to avoid it and learn it and then avoid it. Then we go into like 2-point and 3-point perspective, basically. Okay. And this is basically now we are coming to a 3-point perspective. 2-point perspective is basically just, yeah, everybody gets it right. You know, it's like no big deal. It's just like two points. Okay. Like that. So coming from that, you know, we'll start with some 3-point boxes. Okay. This is the first exercise that you want to do while you're dealing with the figures in perspective is basically how to draw the box. Okay. So we make students exercise this a lot. Okay. It's like, okay, you want to like, why we're learning all this is just for this exercise. Okay. Like this is the goal. Okay. You want to create like boxes in whatever angle that you like. Okay. We also make them do the rotational box exercise. Okay. Where we ask them to like rotate the box in space, usually in some sort of like animation format. Okay. So there we go. It's a very, very important thing because everything inside this world, right? You want to draw everything, you want to draw anything, right? Everything inside this world can be considered a box, right? Or can be considered contained in a box, right? For example, this could be a figure, right? This could be a figure, or this could be anything else. This could be a building, this could be a like prop, or whatever you can think of. This could be a house, a car, okay, anything that sort. Or anything, just like I said, you know, anything in this world can be just contained inside a box. You can think of that as a box and then turn the box, right? Make the perspective, like create the illusion, and then just like start like building up, okay, from inside. So there we go. The first exercise, you know, all we are learning this perspective and everything is just like reach here, okay? So you can like create freehand boxes in space, okay? In whatever angle that you like. For example, I want to turn this box, okay? So I can just quickly do it like that. I can just go about and say, okay, here's a box. And you can just see a little bit of the front side, just a little bit right there. Okay, so I just like turn the box this way. Okay. Anyway, so that is a simple thing about perspective. Okay. Now small instances in perspective, like when you start to combine this with a figure. Let's say a figure is standing. Okay, you want to start small. Okay? You don't want to start like, oh no, perspective is like whole figure in perspective. Okay, you can just like start small and say, okay, let's draw figure's torso, and the figure is standing, let's say. But we can just like deal with a small leg. We can just deal with one leg. Okay, or even just the half leg. Okay, let's say the thighs of this, which is like this. To see what's happening, right? The thighs like started to come towards us. Now it's not the extreme perspective of the whole figure, but that's the extreme perspective of the upper leg. Okay, or thigh, let's say, right here. And let's just make the simple one like this. And here's the feet. Okay, like this. So there we go. Now, so how is this coming towards us? It's like this. This is how it's coming towards us. See what I'm saying? Okay. So, and this can be again, you know, this can again be taken as inside a box. So let's say we're dealing with this kind of box here. Let's say something else. Okay. And again, I'm turning this box a little bit towards you that side because we're looking on the side of this box. Okay? So there we go. We are again like dealing with this kind of box for this style. Okay. Any, I don't think there's any question. Okay. Okay. Sure. All right. So you want to start with something like this. Maybe let's say an arm coming towards us. Okay. So let's say an arm coming towards us, towards camera. Okay. Something like this, maybe. Okay. Now, obviously, we're gonna teach you all of this, but I'm just like giving you some examples here. Okay. Let's say arm is coming towards us. Okay. Or maybe even more. I'm just like showing some of it, but you can just go with extreme angles of this. For example, that can be more like this, if you want to. You can just see a little bit of the forearm, just see the little bit of the back, and here we go. So more like this could happen. Okay. So there we go. We have the forearm, the bicep, the upper arm, and there's the deltoid at the back. Okay. And you see how big that hand actually looks like. Okay. Now, these are all the things that you're gonna be using in maybe let's say comic books and stuff, right? Or anything that you can use as anything for sure. It's not just comic books, but I'm just giving a good examples like where you'll find like these kind of figures in comic books, mostly. All right. So small instances in perspective, right? Maybe an arm, start with an arm, start with the like let's say a leg, or anything like that sort of. And then what you want to do is like stack. You want to learn like how to stack these boxes on top of each other to create this illusion of perspective. Okay. So okay, there's a question, I guess. It is important to study the cross sections of the figure for extreme perspective. Cross section. Yes, I would say it's not as like you don't want to study like. Let's say if you want to like get this illusion going on, you don't want to like learn like every muscle's cross section or something, right? But you can do something like this, for example. Let's say here's a torso, right? And I can just say, okay, I'm just kind of cut this torso from here, and this is it, right? Something like this. So maybe that's a cross section, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a good thing, good thing to learn, cross sections. But you don't want if you just want to create the illusion, you don't want to get to like the muscle cross section or something like that, right? Just like the basics, okay? Fundamentally, you want to like learn these cross sections. That's fine. Okay, something like that. All right. Thank you, Dark Knight, for asking the question. Okay, let's get to the stacking itself. Okay. So
don't go too much into stacking because that's what I'm going to be covering, right?
Oh, okay. Well, should I talk about force going on with it?
Nope, that's what Swanley will take care of that. I would say, if anything, what we want you guys to be aware of is, like Mrityunjay mentioned, that 3 point, well, any point, even starting with 1 point, is just the mere fact that things getting smaller to big, really, and how perspective affects that is how we end up getting into this place of extreme perspective, right? So, and what perspective does is it's controlling really small to large, I guess, more than anything, right? The fact that things are pinching down to a point with 2 extension lines is what's causing us to, think that there's extreme perspective. So I think, being aware of the fact that you have these 2 extension lines that come to a vanishing point. The vanishing point is what's really helping fool our brain into thinking that there is such a thing as extreme perspective, right? And the more that you do that, the more that it's going to look like there's a lot of depth in the page, right? So let's see here. I'm going to just do an annotate on Mrityunjay's screen here before I come in. So the point here I'm trying to make is, those are great, by the way. If the vanishing point's here like this, and I'm doing this, right? The bigger the change is between something like this to something like this, the more it seems like we have a scale change. But when it comes to perspective, the closer you bring these objects to this point, right? So right now, let's say I have an object here. The closer you bring the object to the point, the more extreme the perspective becomes, right? So here, I'll grab a different color. So if the object is there, now I want to bring it closer. So I'm going to push this object closer to the point. It's here. You'll see that means now the pinching has become more obtuse, basically. It's wider. So from here to here is much wider from the top to the bottom. And that's making the, how do I explain this? That makes the rate of which the distance from here, from the point to where that extension line is, this distance right here, since it's shortened, it means that the object would get smaller faster, right? So for instance, if the object is here and the point is here, that's one thing versus the object being here and the point being here. Because if we put extension lines to this like this, right, the closer it gets, the wider those angles become, and this thing becomes a lot bigger and gets smaller a lot faster, right? So if I keep putting shapes in there, right, you'll see from this distance to here, right, whatever x is the x-axis, not to get too mathematical here, but this is x. You know, the distance here is greater than the distance is here, right? Because the distance is shorter, we're ending up in, notice I said shorter, we end up in the space of more foreshortening, right? And that really affects like what Mrityunjay drew here with, you know, how much are we talking about, right? It's like here, his perspective on this figure is like this, you see? So, and it's pinching down. So it's pretty close, right? It's getting wide relatively fast. If he were to move that figure more and more over the point of perspective, the vanishing point, right? Then that means things are going to get bigger or smaller even more quickly over a shorter distance on the screen, right? When I say this thing about on the screen, it just kind of triggers for me the conversation around you want to always be thinking, again, 3D, understand the rules like Mrityunjay was talking about here with perspective, but also 2D, you know? So when I bring in stuff like X and Y and stuff like that, those are very flat two-dimensional ideas. And I'm very aware of those two-dimensional ideas relative to the three-dimensional ideas at the same time, right? So the abstract of perspective is literally just having a point with extension lines that go to it. And the wider apart they are, and the close, you know, the wider apart they are, the more you're saying this object gets small faster versus going like this and giving us more length, right? More X means that object is getting smaller over a longer distance, right? So therefore it's not as extreme, right? We're here to talk about extreme perspective. It becomes less extreme because of that. So you're squeezing space, basically, right? That's what I guess I'm getting at here if I try to shorten all of my babbling here, right? This distance is longer, this distance, you know, so we have here to here, and then we have here to here. The shorter that distance to the point, the more extreme the perspective becomes, right? To finally put in a very clear one sentence. So you want to be aware of that distance. That's going to push the extremity, the extremeness of space, right, in perspective. So I'm going to take over, Mrityunjay, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring it over to stacking like you were bringing up and discuss that.
That knowledge. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
So, yeah, so to Mrityunjay's point, there's stacking. Right. And so I grabbed the Superman image because it's such a classic example of stacking, right? So what we mean by stacking is, you know, you've got objects that are stacked one in front of the other, right? And then they go back in space. So the first thing that popped in my head was a Superman image, right? Because you always have this fist in your face with his body off behind him. We can't even see his waist. I can't see his feet, right? Like it's actually blocking all that off. So the main stacking that's happening here is, let's grab a color that'll stand out here. The main stacking is, you know, his fist and then his body, right? And you could say his head is there too, but his head's not covered by his fist. So we don't know if that's in perspective, really, right? It's like hand and fist are right next to one another. So, you know, we buy into it because we know as human beings that there's an arm behind that fist and that's going to go all the way down to his shoulder. But if I didn't know anything about human anatomy and I came in here, you know, with total ignorance of that, and I just looked at this as a piece of art, I would say, I don't know if that's in front or back, right? It's hard to tell. So this image could be improved, to tell you the truth, right? By trying to create more clear stacking, right? So let's do that really quick. I wasn't intending on this, but let's do it. So I'm going to knock this back like so. And if I wanted to show more of how can I get to the fist to the face, right? And believe into the stacking, I would want to try to get like the fist over here, right? Like so. And I would show a little bit more of like the forearm and then the upper arm and the shoulder, right? Because now I'm getting to stack, right? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. I might even try to get the shoulder and get the face behind it. You see what just happened there? Ah, interesting, right? Man, now I could start buying into these blobs, right, which become his anatomy, overlapping one another. All right, if I want to make that shoulder work more like that too, right? Like this is starting to work here actually, right? So we have the cape, right? The cape is blocked by his head right there. And then we put his shoulder behind the cape. So our brain understands 1, 2, 3, you know, because of this, which is called an intersection, right? Intersections, right? These T, I call them T intersections, the letter T. And there's another one over there because they look like the letter T. It's like this looks like this, right? Over here, the T would be like this, right? They look like the letter T. And this is in the Force books, by the way, if you want to read up more on it. But you can see by me stacking more clearly, I can see the progression back in space of Superman's arm to his head, to the cape, to the shoulder. Where here you'll see this is totally free of this, and there's not enough info in here really to tell me. It's almost tangented, in fact, the knuckles versus the edge of the arm there. So, you know, I would push that out so I can get clearer stacking to give me better space, right? Otherwise, you end up with sort of a flat sticker, right? Let's see, any questions? Is stacking similar to big, medium, small? Yes and no. Redacted. Big, medium, small is really a design idea. You could use it for stacking and say, you know, big is closest, medium is medium furthest, and small is furthest away. But the term big, medium, small is not only about depth, it's also about design. You know, it's more than just space, but you could use it. That's one use of big, medium, small. Yeah, as Swanley just said, thank you. Right, exactly, right on. So let's see, you can all tell he's wearing a hat, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so stacking, right? So this is the idea of stacking. Well, another term for how stacking happens, going off of everything that Mrityunjay just talked about with perspective, is foreshortening, right? We've all heard this term before. And foreshortening is defined, you know, by what I was saying with the annotation tool with Mrityunjay on, we're really talking about distance, right? So to redraw it here in Photoshop real quick, if I have an object that's here and it's this far away from this vanishing point, right? That distance, this distance here is X, right? Let's call it X1, right? But I do that again, and now I say, here's the vanishing point and the object is this far away, right? That distance is much shorter. So this is X2, right? So you can see that's going to have more foreshortening because it's closer to the point, right? So if like I wanted somebody like Superman in perspective or somebody standing, like Mrityunjay had that drawing in red in perspective, the closer I bring that point to the actual person, right, the more foreshortening I have, right? Like I have the point like right there, and if I put their feet here, it means they're standing right over the point. Imagine the point through a glass floor, right? If I did that, then this stacking becomes very, very strong, right? This foreshortening, notice the word shorten in there, right? Short. That gets very strong, and that is what's that proximity of one object to another object being closer to each other than it normally is when it's flat is what causes this foreshortening or stacking, right? So This is from the 10th anniversary edition of the Forest book, the first Forest book. It talks about foreshortening, and here it is trying to prove that point. So here's an object, this tube that's sitting here, and that tube's normal distance, again, let's say whatever x is, let's say it's 2 feet, right? Equals 2 feet. So this thing is 2 feet tall. If I were to start tilting it down, right, into space, so now we can start seeing inside the tube, you can see I've almost cut the distance in half. Let's just say that now x equals 1 foot, right? I cut it in half. Is it really 1 foot? No, it's not 1 foot, it's 2 feet. But visually, right, visually, which is what we care about as artists, right, visually, on the flat surface of the page, meaning like here's this flat surface, right? It's been cut in half, right? It's half the height. Three-dimensionally speaking, I start understanding, well, that tube is now in perspective. There's a vanishing point out here somewhere, right? That's caused the tube to look like this. There's now an ellipse here. Like these are all the skills that you learn, obviously, to draw this tube in perspective, you see? But like I said, on a two-dimensional plane, I cut that distance in half, and that is foreshortening, right? So a common mistake that students make is when they have, models that are drawn lying down, for instance, reclining, and the leg is coming out towards them, they draw the leg as if it's flat. They give that leg its normal length, right? And by giving it its normal length, you're missing the foreshortening. So in brief, the point is, be aware when something is foreshortened that you have to shorten that distance. And that's when I go more from, we have eyeball, brain, and hand in our drawing equation. I kind of push myself over to my eye a little bit and I go, trust what you see, right? I tell myself, like, trust what you see, because my brain wants to lie. My brain goes, the leg is long. It's this long. It should be as long as a torso, for instance, right? I should make it a long leg. And my eye's like, no, that's not what it looks like. Trust what you see. And then I look and I see, darn, the knee is like really close to the hip, or the ankle is really close to the knee. Okay, let me draw that, because now I see it. And then my brain goes, okay, the reason that's happening is because of foreshortening, and it's this kind of tube, and here's the perspective, and so on and so on. Right? But I have to go through this like little brief half step of trust what I see, right? Trust what I see versus just let my brain take over, because my brain's going to cheat. Okay. Any questions so far on that? These are also great in 3D and can refer to design proportions. Yes, thanks. They really sculpted figures I can hold in my hand. Yeah, holding stuff in your hand is great to see as point, because then you can really push that foreshortening, Let's see, and then is the mic behind you in the thumbnail form? Yeah, the mic behind me is stacked. In fact, I would say it's more stacked than you can see we could see the perspective. It's like a great example of, right, of like giant hand, body, and face, and then background. So it's just objects, right? Flat objects, stacked. One is blocking the other. And because of that, you read that there's some perspective in there. But we're not getting the picture behind me doesn't have any extension lines pinching down to a point. It's purely stacked, right? And it still works. So it's sort of a shortcut to perspective. And that's kind of what I'm trying to share with you guys here. So let's keep moving forward, and you'll see I have more examples to share with you. So I just took these today before today's session. Some of you may know that follow me on Instagram. I went to Mexico a couple of weeks ago. And so this shelf in my dining room happens to have some of the things that we bought there, right? I bought the skull, and I bought this dragonfly there, which I thought was cool. Notice the distance in between the objects, right? So let's put a layer above this, right? And what I want you to be aware of is like, it's like, how close is this, to this, to this, right? And then we have this right here too, right? So you look at that, and then we go here, right? And now look at those points. See what happened, right? So now all of a sudden, this guy is over here, right? This guy is here, that's this one. And this guy is all the way over here, right? And this guy is here. So look at what happened. They started to spread out, right? Look at the blue dots compared to the red dots, right? All of a sudden, we're flattening out space. And now look at this. Whoops, wrong one. This one, right? So you can see it just gets flatter and flatter and flatter, right? We go from here to here to here, right? So they keep getting pushed out further and further apart, right? So that's because of perspective. Perspective's doing that. That's sort of the grandfather of all of this here. The foundation is the perspective. The perspective is driving this. What I want you to be aware of is perspective is creating the shortcuts perspective is this idea of stacking and foreshortening, right? You're shortening distance. And the more you shorten the distance in between objects, the more you're going to get into a stacking situation, right? Yeah, we'll do one more and then I'll sketch one out for you. Here's another shelf in my dining room. You can see I have a lot of odd things in my in my house, right? So this was from Venice many years ago. I have no idea where we got this skull from. And this rabbit we just bought at a gallery recently, right? It looks like he got punched in the face, right? So here, look at this. Look at the stacking. Right here, I'll mark the Venetian mask. We got this skull and we have the rabbit. And then there's this other mask down there we just bought in Mexico, right? So look, the other guy's not even here anymore, right? So he's like down here. Then we have him, then we have him, then we have him. So these are starting to like spread out. This guy didn't get moved too much. This guy really started getting moved out, right? And last but not least, you know, I'm flattening it out further, right? So it's hard to tell between those last two photos, I'd say. But look at between 1 and 3. Right? You could really see the change. Notice the extension lines on the shelving, right? See how the pinching is occurring, right? The pinching is way more drastic here. What I mean by the pinching is this, right? You can see this, like everything's going to this point that's down here very drastically. When we get up here, you know, look at how much weaker that that pinching is, right? So you can see it there. I'll do it here. Now it's like this. So the point's getting pushed much further to the right, right? Way, way, way further to the right. So the perspective, the vanishing point in the first image is much closer to the objects, right? The vanishing point's like down in here somewhere, you see? Here, it's actually like this. So it's like here, you see? It's right here. It's very close to the objects themselves. And because of that, the distance between these objects, which is what I was talking about before, compared to the vanishing point is pretty close, right? So keep in mind your vanishing point relative to the objects, right? The more you stack, the more you bring things closer together, the more you're creating foreshortening because you're shortening the distance between these objects. And that gives you extreme perspective, right? Really extreme perspective. Now, last but not least, with that extreme perspective, the other thing that gives you that perspective, this goes back to what Redacted was talking about, is we may do this and stack right here. I could do this and stack. So it's stacked, right? We got number 1, we got number 2, we got number 3, right? And that gives you these overlapping moments, right? Like so. And we can tell there's space there. If I want to add perspective to it, what does perspective do? What perspective adds to this equation of stacking is perspective actually creates scale, right? And going back to what I've been drawing over and over again today, right, is I have this, I got a vanishing point. These extension lines, their job is to give you scale over a distance on the page, right? So you'll notice the line gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So if I did this with the circles, right, the circles would now look like this, right? I have my extension lines, right? So now it looks like this. You see? So you go from, let's say, large to medium, you know, to small, right? You see? So that's the simple trick to all this, right? Be aware of your vanishing point. Be aware of extension lines. Extension lines create scale. And as you stack, right, you're going to create much more dramatic depth, right? Way more dramatic depth. So that leads me to this page, right? You can see here that I have extreme space and a lot of overlap going on. But perspective is helping that. You know, I'm very aware when I did these drawings. These are also from the 10th anniversary book. look at the size of the guy's hand compared to his head, right? And notice, going back to the Superman drawing, I more clearly tried to present the different forms, right? So we have like the form of the hand, the wrist, right? The forearm, the upper arm, the shoulder, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we have this here, right? It's like 6. Then you have finally the face, 7, right? So all that stuff is stacked back in space. Look at this model, right? It's like we've got the foot, number 1, the ankle area, number 2, the overlaps for the lower leg, number 3, the knee, number 4, the upper leg, number 5, the rear end and pelvis, number 6, right? And keep going. It's like the rib cage and upper body, number 7, right? A rib cage up here blocks us off from her head, number 8, right? So stacking, 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 stacking back, right? If I wanted to add more depth to this, or let's say I wanted to exaggerate it, like, how would I do that? Well, I can give myself some parameters with the idea of these extension lines and say, I want to push this. I could just say, here's an extension line, and I'm going to go with her leg and make this bigger, right? So suddenly I could say, well, I'm going to draw her foot like this. All right, I white this out in here. So you can see my understanding the extension lines as an abstraction and how they're used. I could use that. I can use that to create an even bigger foot, right? And then I can make her ankle wider, and then, more slowly, I should say slowly, more quickly pinch down, right? Make this leg, bigger up here and then get smaller by the time I get to the hip, you see? So the convergence of the idea of these numerous ideas, one is the perspective, right? And then the objects within the perspective extension lines overlapping one another, right, is what gives us extreme perspective. And I want to make sure that I have my little T moments, right? Those are the moments of overlap. These are overlaps, right? They're what allow me to finally create extreme perspective, right? I think I have a couple of other images here I grabbed. These are from the character design book. So you can see here all the overlap. These blue boxes are there to represent scale. So it's like, look at the size of the model's head compared to the hand, compared to the foot, right? Like boom, 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 we're moving back in space. Look at the big foot compared to the little foot, right? Like so tiny, right? So scale here really helped. But there's overlapping moments, like the reason you buy into this visually is because of all this stuff overlapping each other, especially here, right? Like, look at that. Look at the hip. Look at the thigh, right? It overlaps over there. So we got number 2, then we have number 3, and then we have the foot is number 4. Very tight, right? Super tight perspective. Look, what I mean by that when I say tight is how close together those distances are. We know her leg is not that short, right? It's kind of funny if you think about it, right? Like, look how short that leg is. But, if I drew her leg at normal length, it would probably be like out to here, you see? So look at how much shorter it became between the hip, the knee, and like the ankle, you see? So that's what you're trying to look for. Last but not least, I grabbed this. This is from Loomis's book. It's one of the books I remember when I was younger and in school, I used to look through quite often. And this kind of combines what Mrityunjay was talking about and what I'm talking about, because it shows you the idea of these sections of the body in these boxes, right? And I think one of you mentioned cross-section, so you can see there's this little cross-sectional slices of perspective within the figure. You can see how there's an understanding here of like laying like a template of the figure within those boxes and how that actually works and how to set it up. Granted, I got to tell you, I don't know anyone that finally really does all of this, let's say to create an illustration. You want to get past this, but it's good to look at and understand. Like, yeah, this is how space works. This is how the body would work in this space. How you could subdivide boxes if you were going to count heads. I'm not a head counter personally, but you can get into that to help you, create that construction. Okay. All right. So before I hand it off to Swenley, let's just take a look here if there's any of the questions. Question is true that doing 1,000 failure drawings is a sign of improving, or is it? I don't know. It's a good question. Is it a sign of improving or is it a journey of improving due to struggling? I don't know. I think if you do something 1,000 times, you should hopefully get at least some learning out of that, right? Swanley said, if the point of the silhouette is unclear, the drawing will read like a random blob. Amazing drawing, super cool drawings. Thank you guys. I really like the drawings. Thank you. The redacted computer said, is placing vertical lines near the places that are stacked a good way to reference? Yes, I would say it is actually. That's a great point, redacted. So like I just did before, here, it doesn't have to be vertical or horizontal. But I use the joints as like my measuring sticks, like my guideposts, right? So here, let's go back to the other ones. I think they're a little clearer to have this conversation. Yeah, that's better. So when I'm drawing, I'm aware of like, where is the hip? Where is the knee? Where is the ankle? You see, so these are my vertical posts. It's like golf, right? Like a little flag here on each one of these posts, you see? And that helps me understand how far I have to go from place to place. This is the part that typically trips students up, is they put those flags too far apart from one another, right? And it leads to almost as if you're drawing a model that's standing, you know, where you're drawing them laying flat on the ground in profile, where you could see the full length of their leg, right? The more I foreshorten her leg, right? So I could put a flag post here, right? So that's this one. And then I could put a flag post here. And then I could put another flag post here, right? Well, now I've really foreshortened her body, right? So I would have like her leg here, her knee here, and her foot right away here, like this. If I did that, right, now I would have even more foreshortening, right? So here's her hip, right? There's a knee. Look what I just did. I foreshortened this literally from here up to there, right? So I've shortened the space and therefore I've created stronger stacking, right? And that's made her even more foreshortened. Now I could play with that again and say, well, I foreshortened it, but I'd probably make her foot bigger. Notice I didn't make her foot bigger, I made it smaller. So the more stacked something is, usually the stronger the perspective. So I could say there's a vanishing point here and I do this, and I would just say, well, now that I'm stacked like that, I'm gonna make the foot bigger, right? And still keep the knee there. So I'm gonna keep the distance of the stacking I had and then the hip there. So I've combined, what I've done is I've balanced the power of combining scale with stacking, right? So remember, the stronger, I would say more stacking equals more foreshortening, right? You're making things shorter distances, right? That's how the stacking is happening. Shortening, you know, equals, how would I put this? Bigger scale change, right? From small to big. So these all tie into one another, right? The more you're stacking means that must be the more foreshortening. And typically then the more foreshortening should actually create bigger scale change, right? Your big to small is going to get stronger and stronger. So if I stack like this and things are like almost right next to one another, and then they get closer together, right? What's happening is the object in the front will get bigger and the one in the back will get smaller, you see? So here's the extension lines, here's the extension lines, here's the extension lines, you see? And the stuff gets closer together, right? So these distances from like this center to 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 finally like boom, 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 they're almost right on top of one another, you see? So that's it, right? This is the tricks. These are kind of the shortcuts that you learn due to drawing a lot of perspective, right? Like there's lots of different things that come together to make it faster. Dark Knight says, repetition failure key to learning according to the most recently published studies. Learned this from the Huberman Lab podcast. Yeah, I never heard of it. I gotta finish one. Okay, so Swami, I'm gonna hand it over to you, okay?
Yes, thank you, Mike. That was great.
Thanks.
Let's go over here. So Tunja and Mike did a great job in explaining to you guys about perspective and the idea of stacking. And of course, we're drawing with force, right? We're using the force drawing method. So we still want all those parts to stay connected. Like you can see the different body parts, but we still want to understand how do they connect as a unified whole. So in order to do that, let's start simple. You know, we have a fair amount for shortening here, but not so much that like everything is completely covered. So this is a good starting point. Let's zoom in a little bit. And what I'm going to do for you guys is let's try to find the paths of force and the rhythms they create. I think we can zoom in even more. It's good. So as you probably know, we usually start with the torso. That's the biggest mass of the body. So let's start there. And let's understand how things are working. Now, so we can see that this guy's like stretching. He's stretching here. And you can see some compression at the back. So at this point, I'm kind of like using X-ray vision, meaning that I'm figuring out what's happening with the hidden parts, you know, so I'm thinking through and using my imagination to fill in the gaps here as to what's going on. So this is how the torso would be working. And from here, now if you're thinking about paths, we can drive force from this path, and that starts bringing us into the closest arm. So we can go to the arm, and here's kind of like a waterfall falling down the wrist, now into the fingers. And we can connect from arm to arm. So he's stretching his arm out here. And here we have another waterfall going down, falling into those fingers. And let's see, like this leg is relatively simple because it's just sticking out. So I can see that it is probably working front to front. You know, so I can create a path here that connects all the way to the foot. And here, again, I could just go and, you know, just draw the portion that I see. But in order to really understand, for me, I really need to, again, think through and imagine, like, where would the pelvis be back here? And how do I connect from the pelvis into the leg? Now, like, where would the thigh have to be in order for what I see back here to make sense? Now, so I imagine the farther side of the pelvis being all the way over here. Then we drive over the top of the hip to the front of the thigh and the front of the lower leg. Then we would connect to that foot. Last but not least, we have the neck and head. We can see the pit of the neck is right here. The neck is like curving forwards, and we have the face and the head sticking out. So here we have the paths, you know, even in foreshortening. So the important thing to keep in mind is just because there is extreme foreshortening doesn't mean that all of a sudden force and rhythm disappeared. You know, it's still there. It gets foreshortened and it gets overlapped as well, just like would happen with the forms and the shapes. So let's give it a shot in drawing it over here to bring us into some other important points. So we already did the overlay. So this should be, let me switch colors here. So we already have the information. So I'm starting with the torso again. We saw that this was like hanging or stretching, I should say, in the context of the action. And here is where what Mike talked about earlier about just trusting your eye. As I'm drawing this, I have to trust the distance between like this top edge of the torso to, let's say, the bottom, you know, the rear ends. Like, what's the distance from here to here? Because my mind will want to make this longer. to be closer to something that we would see if the model was standing like straight up. So as I'm drawing, I really have to pay attention to the flat distances, between the parts. So we have the torso here, and let's go from here into that shoulder, and we have the arm. Now I'm just drawing with the forces right now. And the reality is that it has its limitations, because the thing that I'm not really showing is form. So if you're only drawing with the forces, yes, you can get the paths and you can get some like overlapping moments here and there. And like Mike pointed out before, like the distances between the joints themselves can suggest foreshortening. But if you're just working with line like this, again, it's limited to what you can show. So the solution to that would be to first of all start adding form, and I could do that in the form of wrapping, what we call wrapping lines, meaning I can relate the human body to a cylinder, and I can start using elliptical cross sections to help me understand which way things are going in space. So that already brings us to, or it gives us more information as to what's going on. And this, of course, requires some understanding of drawing basic forms in perspective, and we did a stream about that a while back. So feel free to go back and watch that. So this is telling me which way the body parts are going in space. Now I can see that, okay, this is coming out towards us. Same for this arm. Now I could use wrapping here at the top of the torso, and normally I look for the pit of the neck as my landmark, and that is around here. And even in placing these dots, I'm paying attention to its distance from the top and from the bottom. That helps me to estimate that landmark. And in doing that, I think this might even have to go lower, like we're seeing a lot of his upper torso. So I can treat this as a cylinder. So this is then the top plane right here. Now I could add some more wrapping lines back there. So that is giving us some information. And of course, if we really want to be as precise as we can be, the next step would be to introduce shape, and force shape to be more specific, meaning that at the other side of the curves, we start adding straights or straighter lines. And this really kind of like completes the 3D puzzle, of the human body. And with shapes also comes the negative shape. So negative shape is basically the shape that we see around the object. So again, if you look at the object from a flat point of view, you have the positive shape, that is the shape of the object that you draw, in this case the body, and you have the negative shape, which is the shape around the object, and together they form like these puzzle pieces. So I can look at this puzzle piece and I can then compare it to the puzzle piece that I have in the drawing, and that helps me with proportion and also with the foreshortening itself. So let's see, let's quickly add a bit more information in here. So let's add the leg. So here I can use the negative shape. I can look at the back of the arm and say, what's the distance from here to where the thigh starts, for example. And I have to trust that distance in order to like match the foreshortening as I see it happen in the image. So we have this curve here, and we saw that this was front to front. So we can add a straight, and I can add a straight or straighter line back here. And we have the foot. And here, to add some form, notice that this is like the top plane of a box. I can clearly see the top plane here of the knee. So I would definitely add that edge, treat that knee as the front edge of a box. I can use some elliptical wrapping lines in there to help you understand which way things are going in space. So ultimately you want to combine force, form, and shape to get the drawing to work, to keep it clear as to what's going on. Let's add the head in here, and you have the neck. Now, and ultimately what I also like to do, and I recommend you do, is to add some perspective guidelines, especially if the figure is interacting with the ground plane. Let me do it on a different layer so you can see it. Let's grab another color here. Because we don't want the figure to just be floating on the page. So what I like to do is imagine if there was some mats on the floor in the image, what would that mat look like? And that helps to further emphasize the fact that we're dealing with a figure in three-dimensional space here, and it's not just floating in midair on the page. So this gives us a good setup that we could then develop further. I could add some wrapping in the head as well, because we are looking at the top of this guy's head. Now this gives us a good basis to further refine. Okay, so we still have a couple of minutes left. Let's do one more. So here it's getting a bit more extreme in the foreshortening. Notice that now we only see one leg, and we don't see the pelvis at all. We just see the rib cage. So let's try and figure this out. And this time I'm going to just draw it directly. So I'm focusing on the action, even though it's foreshortened, again, I'm still using the same thought process. So it appears like he's stretching on this side and he's compressing on the screen left side. So that would give us a C curved torso, basically. But we don't see the pelvis, we only see the rib cage. So let's just go and draw that. And I'm just going to treat this as one force shape. Also, here's the curve. And this side it's straighter. I can use some wrapping here. Again, I'm looking at the pit of the neck and its distance from the bottom of the rib cage. So this could be like a cylinder. You could treat it as a box. Whichever one you find easier to start with. So we have this, and we know that back here there's the pelvis. It just happens to be like behind what we see. But I want to think about the pelvis and how this connects, and that makes us or gets us to the thigh. So I'm thinking about this pad. Now I can use a force shape here to get the thigh in place. And let's see, from here, I can follow this curve here at the back, which connects me into the shoulder. And this arm, and visually I can see that the elbow is just a little bit past the knee. Now we have the hands down here. I'm not going to draw the details of the finger at this point. So as I'm drawing this, notice what happened. I can see that, hey, this negative shape is very big. So I can rely more on the 2D aspects of the image. So I'm looking at the negative shape now, and I'm using that to help me get the right proportions and placements of this arm. You know, so I'm shaping this out, and the hand would be more down here, and we can add some wrapping here for form. You know, so this is getting me a bit more accurate as to what I'm actually see. You know, so I might wanted to make this more of like a straight on view again by making the arm longer than it actually is. See, this arm is coming out. I really need to look at the distance from here, the elbow. Let's put our straights here and a bit of wrapping. And then we have the palm of the hands. And the hands appears very big because it's very close to us. So this arm is coming out, then it's taking the corner, and it continues coming out to the wrist. And last but not least, we have the heads. See, so I'm looking at where exactly is the edge of his face. You know, what's the shape that I see? And the head is very close to us, so it appears quite big. So I'm just shaping that out. And also, and this is basically what we see. It kind of like feels weird because my mind wants to draw like the other leg in there or the pelvis, but we don't see them. You know, so this is it. And from here, we have a good setup that we can then refine further. Same as with the other drawing. Imagine that there is a mat on the floor in the image. What would that mat look like? That this further helps emphasize the extreme perspective that we're dealing with. And we could even add it back here. So there's a bit of overlap. So this sets us up to with a sketch that we can then refine further as we go. All right, hopefully this was helpful for you guys. So remember all the principles, and that at the end you want to use force, form, and shape. You know, like force shape actually brings force and form together, and it helps you make sure that everything stays connected and fluid as you're drawing the extreme poses. All right, were there any questions, Mike?
Nope, it's all good. Great job, nice and clear.
Thank you.
All right, guys, so tricky subject, you know, extreme perspective, but, you know, as we've seen in today's drawings, really, really powerful, right? And adds a lot of drama to your work. You know, keep in mind, we're always working, like I said, with this very flat two-dimensional plane. And when you start learning these tricks of extreme perspective, you're cheating the human brain into the illusion of thinking that suddenly that flat plane is not flat anymore, right? That it's actually occupying depth. And that is one of the master illusions of learning how to draw well. So hopefully we left you with some valuable tips today in understanding how to do so. Thank you, Swami and Mrityunjay, again, as always, for your draftsmanship and teaching skills. And we will all see you next Friday with another hopefully insightful, educational, and exciting Force Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone, and take care.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we're out.